So here you have a dogma of the church, but you have to start off by saying, but it doesn't need to be explicitly taught in Scripture. And so the idea then would be, well, this is part of the oral tradition, but the reality is, of course, that there is no oral tradition. Anyone who seriously examines the subject of purgatory knows that it developed slowly over centuries, that the biggest impetus in its development was Pope Gregory the Great. But you're still talking half a millennium after the death of the last apostle. So it is something that required numerous lines of development to come together, and that you really don't have the modern doctrine of purgatory with satisfatio and indulgences and supererogation and so on and so forth until the 14th century. So you have elements of it before that, but the full dogma that you have to believe now today, long time after the apostles. And so that's the historical reality of purgatory. And that's why you have to deny sola scriptura at the start, which is what Jimmy Akin does here. But he wants to try to provide some verses. So let's see what verses he uses.
If it's just a matter of purgatory in particular, well, if you look in 2 Maccabees, there is a passage where you have Judah Maccabee. He was a military leader and political leader in ancient Israel, and he and his men come across the bodies of some other soldiers who had fallen in battle. They died in battle, and they were fighting for God. So they're fighting on this, for Israel on the side of the true God, but they had committed sin, and this.
Okay, let's. Most people, especially most people in our audience, which I assume majority are not Roman Catholics, and of course, a vast majority of Roman Catholics too, are not familiar with this story. It's in 2 Maccabees chapter 12, beginning at verse 38. So let's refamiliarize or encounter for the first time this particular story that is being told. Then Judas assembled his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was coming on, they purified themselves according to the custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the next day, as had now become necessary, Judas and his men went to take up the bodies of the fallen and to bring them back to lie with their kindred in the sepulchres of their ancestors. Then under the tunic of each one of the dead they found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. And it became clear to all that this was the reason these men had fallen. So they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge, who reveals the things that are hidden, and they turned to supplication, praying that the sin that had been committed might be wholly blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as a result of the sin of those who had fallen. He also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking for the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore he made atonement for the dead, so that they might be delivered from their sin. There is the text as it is found in the second book of Maccabees. So may I just point something rather painfully obvious out here? Prayers to the dead in Roman Catholicism are not for people who are not in purgatory. In other words, they are only for people who die in a state of grace. Now, the whole application of all this to an Old Testament setting seems completely irrelevant to me, but following through, let's follow the story through. Idolatry is a venial sin. I thought idolatry, if it would be anything, is a mortal sin. In fact, doesn't the book of Isaiah say that he who chooses an idol is toeva, an abomination before God? Yeah, it does say that. Isaiah 41. Or 44. I think it's in both, actually. Anyway, so these men were carrying idols on their bodies. And yet, prayers are being made for them, and that's somehow relevant to purgatory. So idolatry is a venial sin, and it does not destroy his grace of justification, evidently, I guess. Of course, all these are such anachronistic categories that have nothing to do with the original text, that it's hard to even know. But obviously, there's nothing about purgatory here. There's nothing here that says that this was the right thing to do, that God approved of this, or anything else. But there's more that Mr. Akin forgot to mention to his caller. And that's going to come up in the next section, though. So we'll let Mr. Akin continue on.
A role in their falling in battle. And so what Judah does is he, number one, takes up a collection to have a sacrifice offered at the temple in Jerusalem for these people. And that signifies that in some way, even in this life, we can help people after they've died. And he also has his men.
What that signifies is that Judas had prayers offered. What does that? It's talking about the forgiveness of the sin. Forgiveness for them or forgiveness for the army. Remember what happened at Ai? One guy steals some stuff. What happens to the army after that? They suffer defeat. There's a federalistic idea here, not an individual, we want to pray for these guys to get them out of purgatory concept. These people have no concept of purgatory by any stretch of the imagination.
For those who had fallen in battle. And so that also signifies that in some way in this life, we can pray for those who have fallen, who are no longer alive, and in some way help them. And so that presupposes the existence of a state where people's journey to heaven is not yet complete. They're on their way to heaven, they fell asleep in righteousness, but they
fell asleep as idolaters. The text has nothing to do with this at all. This is eisegesis to the nth degree.
Nevertheless, can still be helped by our prayers and by having sacrifices made for them, like the modern sacrifice of the Mass. Now, depending on where your friend is at the moment, she may or may not recognize 2 Maccabees as an actual book of Scripture, because in the Protestant community, it is not commonly recognized as a book of Scripture. And so if she's been influenced by some who are in the Protestant community, she may have doubts about, does this book belong in the Bible or not? And that raises a question. How do we know which books belong in the Bible? And if you look at the situation carefully, it's clear that the canon of the Old Testament includes some books that our Protestant friends don't recognize as Scripture. In fact, if you look in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, it even contains a reference to this very book of 2 Maccabees. Not the same passage, but the same book. And again, we have a lot of stuff at Catholic.com that can help you with that if you want to.
Yeah, I'm sure they do have a lot of stuff there. I don't know if it includes any of the debates we've done on the Apocrypha, because I think that we've done real well in our debates on the Apocrypha with Jerry Matitix and Gary Machuta. And I would be happy to debate Jimmy Akin on this subject too, because he might want to include in the information that he's giving to this lady. He mentions Hebrews chapter 11. Now, be very careful when you hear people say this. There is nowhere in Hebrews chapter 11 where the writer of the Hebrews cites Maccabees as Scripture. Hebrews chapter 11 is what? The faith chapter. And it tells the stories of many of those who have gone before, some of which are not found in Scripture. So the idea is, what's being assumed is, if the Scriptures make reference to a book, it should be in the canon. Problem with that is, the New Testament makes reference to a number of books that even the Roman Catholics don't have in their canon. So that can't follow, can it? Not consistently. See, that's why I really think a lot of Roman Catholic apologists have moved much more to the monologue model than they used to the debate model. When Carl Keating first started stuff, and Patrick Madrid and Jerry Matitix back in the day, they did not have EWTN. They didn't have Catholic Answers Live, and they needed. They needed to get their message out, and so they were much more open to this idea of debate and things like that. Now that they have their kingdom, they got something to protect. They're just not nearly as ready to debate. Have you noticed that? We haven't. What we were talking about? When was the last Roman Catholic debate with that Catholic attorney? I think was like in 2011, 2010, something like that. It's been a while, huh? Yeah, Christopher Ferrara. It's been a while, other than the Tim Staples dividing line debate. So, there's nothing in Hebrews 11 that says Maccabees is scripture, and in fact, the Jewish people never accepted the book of Maccabees as scripture. And all the way up to the days of Cardinal Cajetan, at the time of the Reformation, there were Orthodox theologians that rejected these books of Scripture. And I would think, especially on this subject, that it would be exceptionally relevant to Jimmy Akin to be open in telling his caller, because I know Jimmy Akin knows this. Well, let me just read you from an excellent set of books you need to have in your library. This is William Webster's volume in the Holy Scripture series, but I just needs to be recognized. With reference to which particular we are not acting irregularly, if from the books, though not canonical, yet brought out for the edification of the church, we bring forward testimony. Thus Eleazar in the battle smote and brought down an elephant, but fell under the very beast that he killed, citing 1 Maccabees 6:46. Who am I quoting? I am quoting Pope Gregory the Great. Now, Pope Gregory the Great is a doctor of the church. Pope Gregory the Great is writing between 590 and 604. Pope Gregory the Great is one of the primary people that brought forward the most important elements of development in the doctrine of purgatory. And yet Pope Gregory the Great did not believe that 1st and 2nd Maccabees were scripture. And that clearly represented the view of the church that he knew in that day. I think that would be relevant maybe to share with the lady, don't you think? The reality is that there were far more meaningful biblical theologians theologians who knew the Bible in the early history of the church and all the way down to the time of the Reformation who rejected these books because they recognized, look, what does Romans 3 say? God entrusted his oracles to the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people never viewed these books as scripture. They were never laid up in the temple. They were not part of the 22 books. 39 as we would count them, because of course they count the minor prophets as one, so on and so forth. They were not seen by the Jewish people as scripture. They're never cited as scripture by the apostles of Jesus Christ, who knew them, who made reference to them, but saw them exactly as what they were, non-canonical, edifying stories of the Jewish people, but they're not canon scripture, just as Pope Gregory the Great said. Now, don't you think that would be relevant to mention to the lady? Wouldn't it be nice if we could hope that whoever this lady's talking to, that maybe she will gain access to this information too? Yeah, that would be good. I think that would be good.
That with her, you can go there and type in Maccabees, or you can type in Deuterocanonicals, or you can type in Canon, and all of those will help pull up some resources on that. Suppose, though, that she says, well, I don't want to talk about 2nd Maccabees. I'm not willing to give that weight. Is there anything else you can show her? Yes. Go to 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul talks about how everyone must build on the foundation of...
All right, now here we go. Now, again, I realize we have a lot of callers and listeners who have not seen. I'm going to ask somebody to do something for me in channel. I know some folks in channel are watching. Someone, that's not going to do me good. Because I can't. I will try, without messing this up, to pull up the cross-ex with Peter Stravinskas. I think that'd be a good thing to possibly throw in here later on. It's on YouTube. It's actually not on our, well, it might be on our channel. Well, the whole debate is, but there's also the most popular one is the clip. No. It's not it's another one. But it's the cross-ex with Peter Stravinskas on this subject. And so here it comes. And if you want to hear, what's interesting to me is when I debated Tim Staples here on this program just a few years ago on this, he had the opportunity to have reviewed the Stravinskas material. And he still did not have any meaningful way around dealing with the reality of what 1 Corinthians 3 is actually talking about, which has nothing to do with purgatory. It has everything to do with the judgment of Christian leaders as to how they've built upon the foundation, whether with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw. It has everything to do with the fact there's going to be a day of judgment at the end that's going to judge the quality of their work, and that those who have built with improper motivations will lose the reward of their work, but has nothing to do with indulgences, satispatio, temporal punishments, anything like that at all. Utter eisegesis. But despite that fact, it's all Rome's got. Sometimes you almost feel sad. Roman Catholic apologists, they just, it's Rome's told them to believe this, and so, there it goes.
Christ, but the quality of our work is going to be tested by fire. And if we've built well, then what we have built will survive the testing by fire and will receive a reward. But if not, if we've built poorly on the foundation of Christ, then what we've built will be consumed, but we ourselves will still be saved, but it'll be like escaping through flames, like escaping through a burning building. And so this shows that after we're dead, after our salvation is already secure, because he says this person will be saved, but like escaping through flames. After our salvation is secure, we're still going to be tested based on what we did in this life, and any remaining impurities are going to need to be purged. That's also something.
Okay, that has nothing to do with 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Okay, that is complete eisegesis, and I've already taken up so much time with this, and there's other things I need to get to. I'm going to hold this on to later. Maybe we'll just tack it on at the end of the program, just for your viewing enjoyment. I don't know. We'll see. But that is not what 1 Corinthians chapter 3 is about. It is about the testing of the motivations of Christian leaders in building upon the foundation that Christ has laid in the church. The idea that this has to do with you have this load of temporal punishments for sin that you've not worked off through your confessions and your penances, and that you can't enter into the presence of God now without this period of purging. Again, hundreds of years down the road, slow, incremental development, movement, not due to the in-depth analysis of Scripture, but to the moving away from the analysis of Scripture, you end up with this concept of purgatory.
You could simply infer from the fact that we're not going to be sinning in heaven, we're going to be perfect, and that means all of the traces of sin and all of the remaining kind of gunk that's clinging to us spiritually after this life is going to need to be purged away. The church doesn't say it takes any particular amount of time. It could happen in a flash.
The church has, as Jimmy Akin well knows, said for centuries that it was a temporal thing. You cannot deny that. The gold in the Petrine promise at the top of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican in Rome was paid for by indulgent sales based upon the idea of time in purgatory. You know that. That's historically a reality. To deny that is to simply go, I don't know, I don't see. You know that it was. What's the Sabbatine privilege? What's the scapular all about? Mary descending on the Friday after you die into purgatory and releasing your... What's the Friday? What if you die on Monday? Too obvious. Too obvious, but you get away with it in this kind of context.
But that's going to be a transition we all need to have between being impure in this life and being totally pure in heaven. One last thing, Pope Benedict has an excellent discussion of this in his encyclical on Christian hope, Spe Salvi. That's S-P-E, new word, S-A-L-V-I.
Yeah, there you go. You get what you pay for when you know that's what's good about having debates and things like that is you get to hear both sides. You get to hear both sides, and when you call Catholic Answers, you're not gonna get the whole story. You're not going to get the whole story, and that's why I'm very thankful that we have. Sorry about that. That's why I'm very thankful that we have the debates, so you can hear both sides. You can hear the best both sides have to offer, and I think that's really, really important.